If the prince dies before sunrise, the Alpha King will lose the only thing he has ever loved. The words traveled through the royal fortress like a cold wind, slipping beneath heavy doors and echoing through stone hallways lit by trembling lanterns. Outside, the winter sky hung low and gray over Thornridge Citadel. Snow drifted across the cliffs in slow spirals, covering the kingdom in silence. Inside the highest tower, however, silence did not exist. Servants hurried through corridors carrying bowls of steaming herbs. Guards stood watch with tense expressions. Healers whispered urgently beside shelves crowded with remedies gathered from every corner of the northern territories. Yet none of it was helping. On a bed carved from ancient silverwood, 5-year-old Prince Rowan Thornridge lay motionless beneath layers of blankets. His pale blonde hair rested against the pillow like threads of sunlight that had forgotten how to shine. The room smelled of cedar smoke, dried lavender, and fear. Every few minutes, another healer stepped forward hoping to succeed where the others had failed. Every few minutes, disappointment settled over the room once again. The child's condition remained unchanged. At the far side of the chamber stood Alpha King Cale Thornridge. The most feared ruler in the north looked nothing like the legends whispered across distant packs. There was no fury in his silver eyes tonight, only exhaustion. Days without sleep had carved shadows beneath his gaze. His dark coat hung heavily from broad shoulders that seemed burdened by something no king could command away. He never took his eyes off his son, not when advisors entered, not when healers argued, not even when the royal physician quietly admitted he had run out of answers. Cale simply stood there, watching Rowan's small chest rise and fall beneath the blankets, as though looking away might somehow make the boy disappear. A clock ticked softly from the mantel. Each second felt louder than the last. The oldest healer in the kingdom lowered his hands and stepped back from the bedside. His face had gone pale. Around him, several younger healers exchanged uneasy glances. Nobody spoke at first. Nobody wanted to be the one to say it aloud. Finally, the old healer bowed his head. "Your Majesty," he said quietly, "I am sorry." The words landed heavily in the room. No one moved. No one breathed. Even the fire seemed to grow still. Cale's jaw tightened. For a moment, he stared at the sleeping child. Then he slowly turned toward the gathered healers. There were dozens of them, the most gifted men and women in the kingdom. People who had crossed mountains, rivers, and forests after hearing the royal summons. None had succeeded. Not one. The Alpha King looked at each face before speaking. "You are telling me," he said, his voice calm enough to unsettle everyone present, "that the greatest healers in the north cannot save a 5-year-old boy." No one answered. Outside the tower window, snow continued to fall across the kingdom. Far below, villagers lit candles in their homes. Merchants closed their shops early. Families gathered around dinner tables, speaking in hushed voices about the prince. Because everyone knew the same thing. Rowan Thornridge was more than an heir. He was the kingdom's hope. And tonight, hope was fading. Somewhere beyond the castle walls, beyond the snowy forests and frozen rivers, destiny was already moving. Quietly, patiently, toward a forgotten young woman no one would ever think to call a healer. Emma Whitmore never looked toward the distant mountains anymore. From the hill behind the stable, the snow-capped peaks of the northern territories could still be seen on clear mornings, rising above the forests like silent guardians. But she had long since stopped searching them for hope. Hope had a way of disappointing people like her. The morning air carried the scent of pine and fresh snow as she pushed open the stable doors with her shoulder, a wooden bucket balanced against her hip. Inside, the familiar warmth of the horses wrapped around her immediately. One chestnut mare lifted her head and greeted her with a soft nicker. Emma smiled despite herself. Animals had always liked her. They did not care that she was 22 years old and still had no wolf. They did not whisper when she walked by. They did not lower their voices and call her broken. They simply accepted her presence. "Good morning, Daisy," she whispered, gently brushing the mare's neck. The horse leaned into her touch. A faint warmth spread through Emma's fingertips, subtle and familiar. Daisy relaxed almost instantly. The nervous tension that had made the mare restless moments earlier seemed to melt away. Emma noticed it, as she always did, but quickly looked away. Strange things sometimes happened around her. Small things. Quiet things. Things she had learned never to mention. Outside the stable, voices suddenly echoed through the village square. Excited voices. Curious voices. Emma glanced toward the open doorway. Villagers were gathering near the announcement board. She hesitated before setting down her bucket and stepping outside. Snow crunched beneath her boots as she approached the crowd. Most people ignored her. A few moved aside without looking at her directly. She was used to that. At the center of the square, a royal messenger sat atop a black horse draped in silver banners bearing the crest of Thornridge Citadel. The messenger unrolled a parchment and read in a loud voice. By order of Alpha King Kale Thornridge, all healers, physicians, herbalists, scholars, and gifted individuals are summoned to the royal fortress immediately. Prince Rowan Thornridge remains gravely ill. Any person capable of aiding in his recovery shall be rewarded beyond measure. Murmurs swept through the crowd. Some gasped. Others exchanged worried looks. Emma felt a strange ache settle in her chest. She had never met the prince. She had never even seen him. Yet the image of a lonely child lying awake in a cold room suddenly appeared in her mind with startling clarity. Her heartbeat stumbled. For a brief second, she thought she heard something. Not a voice exactly. More like a distant feeling carried across miles of snow and forest. Sadness. Loneliness. Fear. Emma blinked, and the sensation vanished. Around her, villagers were already discussing the reward. Wealth. Land. Status. Opportunity. Nobody noticed Emma standing perfectly still in the falling snow. Nobody saw the confusion in her eyes. Because far away in the highest tower of Thornridge Citadel, a young prince drifted silently between sleep and waking, and somewhere deep inside, a forgotten connection had just begun to stir. That night, sleep refused to come easily. Emma lay beneath a patchwork quilt in the small room above the stable, listening to winter wind brush against the windows. The village had finally gone quiet, but her thoughts had not. The royal announcement lingered in her mind long after the crowd had dispersed. Prince Rowan. The name seemed strangely familiar, though she knew it should not. She had never visited Thornridge Citadel. She had never stood in the presence of royalty. Yet every time she closed her eyes, she saw the image of a small boy surrounded by candlelight. She saw silver blankets. She saw snow beyond a tall window. Most unsettling of all, she felt his loneliness. Emma sat up suddenly, her pulse racing. Moonlight spilled across the wooden floorboards. The room was empty. The stable below remained quiet except for the occasional movement of a horse settling into fresh hay. She pressed a hand against her chest. The strange feeling returned. Faint, distant, like an echo carried across hundreds of miles. Then she heard it again. Not with her ears. Not exactly. A soft voice. Young. Fragile. Lost. It is cold. Emma froze. The words drifted through her mind like a snowflake landing on still water. Her breath caught. Who was there? She whispered. No answer came. Only a wave of sadness, so deep it nearly brought tears to her eyes. Somewhere far away, a child was afraid. The sensation disappeared as quickly as it had arrived, leaving Emma staring into the darkness. She remained awake for hours afterward. By sunrise, she had convinced herself she imagined the entire thing. Strange thoughts were not uncommon after a long day. Yet as she stepped outside carrying a bucket toward the village well, she noticed something unusual. 3 sparrows sat quietly on the fence near the stable. The moment she approached, they fluttered down and landed only a few feet away. Watching her. Waiting. Emma stopped walking. Animals often behaved strangely around her, but never like this. One sparrow hopped closer. Then another. A faint warmth spread through her hands again. The same warmth she felt whenever frightened horses calmed beneath her touch. The birds remained completely still, almost as if they recognized her. Emma. The voice startled her. She turned to find old Mrs. Holloway standing near the well with a basket of firewood. The elderly woman studied her carefully. You look like you did not sleep. Emma offered a small smile. I am fine. Mrs. Holloway did not seem convinced. Her gaze drifted toward the sparrows gathered nearby. For a moment, something unreadable crossed the older woman's face. Sometimes, she said softly, the world speaks to people in ways others cannot hear. Emma blinked. What does that mean? But Mrs. Holloway simply adjusted her shawl and continued walking. It means you should listen. The old woman disappeared around the corner, leaving Emma alone beside the well. Snowflakes drifted from a pale gray sky. The sparrows remained perched nearby. And somewhere beyond forests, rivers, and mountains, a sleeping prince opened his eyes for the first time in nearly 2 days. The healers called it a miracle. The servants called it hope. But Rowan himself remembered only one thing. A gentle voice he had never heard before whispering through the darkness and making him feel less alone. By late afternoon, the entire kingdom seemed to be holding its breath. Messengers came and went from Thornridge Citadel without rest. Riders crossed frozen roads carrying updates to distant territories. Every few hours, a new healer arrived at the fortress gates believing they possessed the answer no one else had found. Yet as the sun drifted lower behind the mountains, hope continued to slip away. In the village, Emma tried to focus on her work. She cleaned stalls, carried feed, repaired a broken fence near the pasture. None of it helped quiet the strange feeling growing inside her. Ever since dawn, the connection had become stronger, subtle, but impossible to ignore. Several times she stopped in the middle of a task because a sudden wave of emotion swept through her chest. Not her emotions, someone else's. Fear, confusion, exhaustion. Each feeling appeared without warning before fading moments later. By evening, snow began falling again. Thick white flakes drifted through the air, covering rooftops and empty roads. Emma stood outside the stable watching the storm gather when she noticed Daisy pacing nervously inside her stall. The mare rarely behaved that way. Emma stepped closer and placed a hand against her neck. Instantly, the horse relaxed. The tension vanished from its body as though carried away by an invisible current. Emma frowned. This time the warmth flowing through her hands felt stronger than ever before. It spread from her fingertips to her wrists, pulsing softly beneath her skin. She pulled her hand away in surprise. The warmth disappeared. Daisy remained calm. A chill ran through Emma despite the stable's warmth. Something was changing. She could feel it. Miles away, inside the highest tower of Thornridge Citadel, Prince Rowan stared silently at the ceiling above his bed. His eyes were open now, but the improvement had not lasted. The brief awakening had given everyone hope only to leave them more frightened when his strength began fading again. Servants moved quietly around the room. Healers spoke in hushed voices near the fireplace. Rowan barely noticed them. His attention remained fixed on a single memory. A voice. Gentle. Kind. Familiar in a way he could not explain. He had heard it somewhere beyond dreams. Somewhere beyond sleep. Find her. The words escaped his lips so softly that no one heard except the Alpha King sitting beside the bed. Kale immediately leaned forward. Find who? Rowan blinked slowly. His small hand tightened around the blanket. The girl. Kale exchanged a glance with the royal physician. The older man looked confused. What girl? Rowan's silver eyes drifted toward the snow-covered window. The one who was not lonely. The room fell silent. Kale felt his heart sink. The fever was affecting the boy's thoughts again. Yet something in Rowan's expression stopped him from dismissing the words entirely. The child did not look confused. He looked certain. Back in the village, Emma stepped outside after finishing her evening chores. Snowflakes settled in her dark hair. The sky above had turned deep blue. Suddenly a powerful ache struck her chest. She gasped and grabbed the fence beside her. Images flashed across her mind. Candlelight. Silver curtains. A frightened child reaching into darkness. Then a single feeling stronger than all the rest. Help me. The sensation vanished as quickly as it appeared. Emma stood frozen beneath the falling snow. Her breathing quickened. Somewhere far away, a boy she had never met was calling for her. And for the first time in her life, Emma Whitmore found herself wondering if being forgotten by the world had never been the same thing as being ordinary. The storm arrived after midnight. Wind swept across the northern territories, rattling shutters and covering roads beneath fresh snow. In Thornridge Citadel, lanterns burned through the darkness as servants hurried between corridors carrying blankets, hot water, and medicines that no longer seemed to help. Inside the tower chamber, the atmosphere had changed. Hope had become something fragile, something people were afraid to touch. Kale Thornridge stood beside the window overlooking the cliffs. Snow swirled beyond the glass like ghosts crossing the mountains. Behind him, Rowan slept uneasily. The boy's breathing remained shallow. Every few minutes, another healer checked his condition only to step away with the same troubled expression. Near dawn, the royal physician approached the Alpha King. The older man's shoulders looked heavier than they had only days before. "Your Majesty," he said quietly, "we have exhausted every treatment known to us." Kill did not respond immediately. His eyes remained fixed on the storm. "Then find something unknown." The physician lowered his gaze. There was nothing else to say. Meanwhile, many miles away, Emma sat beside her small bedroom window, unable to sleep. The strange connection had become impossible to ignore. Every time she closed her eyes, she felt the same distant pull, like a thread stretching across forests, rivers, and mountains. She rose from bed and wrapped a wool blanket around her shoulders. Moonlight reflected from the snow outside. The village slept peacefully, yet her heart refused to settle. Then it happened again. A sudden wave of exhaustion struck her chest. Not her exhaustion, someone else's. Her knees nearly gave out. Emma grabbed the edge of the table to steady herself. Images flashed through her mind. A silverwood bed, flickering candles, snow beyond a tall tower window. She gasped. The vision vanished. This time, however, something remained. A direction. She could feel it clearly. North. The sensation felt as natural as knowing where the sun rose each morning. North. Toward Thornridge Citadel. Emma pressed both hands against her temples. "This is impossible," she whispered. Yet deep down, she already knew the truth. Whatever connected her to the prince was real. As dawn approached, she finally drifted into a restless sleep. Hours later, she awoke to loud voices outside. Villagers were gathering near the square again. Emma hurried downstairs and stepped into the cold morning air. Another royal messenger had arrived. His horse was covered in frost. His expression was grim. The crowd listened carefully as he unrolled a parchment bearing the royal seal. By decree of Alpha King Kale Thornridge, the messenger announced, the search is expanded. Any individual claiming unusual gifts, healing abilities, ancestral knowledge, or unexplained talents is summoned to Thornridge Citadel immediately. Murmurs spread through the crowd. Some people exchanged doubtful looks. Others shook their heads. Emma felt her stomach tighten. Unexplained talents. The words echoed inside her mind. Beside her, two villagers laughed quietly. At this point, they will invite anyone. Maybe they should ask the stable horses next. More laughter followed. Emma lowered her eyes. Nobody would ever think of her. A wolfless omega who spent her days cleaning stalls and caring for animals. Yet as she turned away from the crowd, a sharp pulse of warmth spread through her hands. Stronger than ever before. For a brief moment, the snowflakes landing on her skin seemed brighter somehow. Then, far away in the tower chamber, Rowan opened his eyes and whispered a single word. Emma. Emma could not stop thinking about the name. She had never heard Prince Rowan speak. She had never stood within 100 miles of Thornridge Citadel. Yet when the messenger's announcement ended and the villagers slowly dispersed, the name echoed through her mind with impossible clarity. Rowan. The sound lingered like a note from a distant song. That evening the snowfall finally eased. Pale sunlight broke through the clouds for the first time in days, turning the frozen fields beyond the village into a sea of silver light. Emma finished her chores earlier than usual and walked toward the edge of the pasture. The air smelled clean and sharp. Somewhere in the distance, a hawk circled above the trees. She welcomed the quiet. Lately, silence had become the only place where she could hear her own thoughts. Or so she believed. As she reached the old fence overlooking the valley, the strange sensation returned. Stronger than before. A pull. Not physical. Not something she could explain. It felt as though an invisible thread had tightened around her heart and gently tugged northward. Emma closed her eyes. Instantly the world around her seemed to fade. She saw candlelight. She saw towering stone walls. She saw a child sitting upright in a bed, staring toward a window covered with frost. Then something unexpected happened. The child looked directly at her. Not through her. At her. His silver eyes widened with recognition. The vision vanished so suddenly that Emma nearly lost her balance. She grabbed the fence and stared at the snow-covered ground. Her breathing had quickened. Her hands trembled. None of this made sense. Yet deep inside, she knew she had not imagined it. Hundreds of miles away, inside the royal tower, Rowan sat surrounded by worried healers. For the first time in days, a faint color had returned to his face. The improvement was small, but everyone noticed it. Everyone except Rowan. He remained focused on a feeling he could not explain. The girl was real. He knew it with the certainty only children sometimes possessed. While adults searched for logic, Rowan trusted what his heart already understood. "She is coming," he whispered. The royal physician exchanged a concerned glance with Cale. "Your Majesty, the fever may still be affecting his dreams." Cale remained silent. He had spent too many sleepless nights dismissing impossible things. His son had spoken the name Emma without ever hearing it before. No healer could explain that. No scholar could explain it either. As darkness settled over the kingdom once again, a decision quietly formed inside Emma's heart. She could continue pretending nothing was happening. She could ignore the visions, the voices, and the impossible connection. Or she could follow it. The thought terrified her. Thornridge Citadel was nearly 200 miles away. She was nobody. A wolfless omega from a forgotten village. The idea seemed ridiculous. Yet when she looked north beneath the first evening stars, the warmth spread through her hands again. Not painful, not frightening, almost encouraging. For the first time in years, Emma felt something she had nearly forgotten existed. Purpose. The decision followed Emma everywhere the next morning. It waited beside her as she filled water buckets. It followed her through the stable aisles. It lingered in every quiet moment between chores. By noon, she realized she had stopped asking whether the connection was real. The question had become something else entirely. What was she supposed to do about it? The village carried on as usual. Children ran through fresh snow. Shopkeepers swept ice from their doorsteps. Farmers discussed weather forecasts and feed supplies. Nobody noticed the storm unfolding inside Emma's heart. To everyone else, she remained exactly what she had always been. The quiet, wolfless omega who kept to herself. Yet every hour the pull toward the north grew stronger. It was no longer a faint sensation. It felt alive, like a compass hidden beneath her ribs. That afternoon, Emma visited Mrs. Holloway under the excuse of delivering firewood. The elderly woman welcomed her inside with a knowing smile. The small cottage smelled of cinnamon tea and cedar smoke. Shelves lined the walls, crowded with old books and carefully labeled jars of herbs. Emma sat quietly at the wooden table while Mrs. Holloway poured tea into 2 cups. For several minutes, neither spoke. Finally, the older woman looked up. "You have made a decision." Emma stared at her. "How did you know?" Mrs. Holloway smiled softly. "Because you look frightened." Emma lowered her gaze. "What if I am wrong?" The older woman stirred her tea. "Then you will return home knowing you were brave enough to try." Emma swallowed hard. "And what if I am right?" Mrs. Holloway's eyes seemed to brighten. "Then your life is about to change." The answer settled heavily in the room. Outside, wind brushed against the windows. Emma stared into her cup. Deep down, she already knew she could not ignore this any longer. Late that evening, she packed a small travel bag. A spare dress, a wool cloak, a loaf of bread, a water skin, nothing more. Her savings fit easily into a small leather pouch. Looking around her room, she realized how little she would leave behind. The thought should have saddened her. Instead, she felt strangely calm, as though she had been waiting for this moment without realizing it. Before dawn the next morning, Emma stepped outside. The world was quiet beneath a blanket of pale blue snow. Frost sparkled across rooftops. Her breath drifted through the cold air in soft clouds. She turned once to look at the stable that had been her home for years. Then she started walking north. Far away in Thornridge Citadel, Rowan suddenly sat upright in bed. The movement startled every healer in the room. For the first time in days, genuine color had returned to his cheeks. His silver eyes were clear, focused, certain. Cale immediately stepped forward. "Rowan." The boy smiled faintly. It was a small smile, but it carried more hope than anyone had seen in weeks. "She is coming," he said. And this time, for reasons he could not explain, the Alpha King believed him. The first day of the journey tested Emma in ways she had never expected. The road north stretched across frozen fields and dense forests coated in snow. By midday, her boots were damp and her shoulders ached from carrying her small travel bag. Yet each time she considered resting, the strange pull inside her heart guided her forward. It never disappeared. If anything, it grew stronger with every mile. The sensation felt less like a mystery now and more like a promise waiting at the end of the road. As evening approached, Emma reached a small trading town nestled beside a frozen river. Smoke curled from stone chimneys, and warm lantern light glowed behind frosted windows. Travelers gathered inside the local inn, speaking quietly over bowls of stew and cups of hot cider. Emma sat alone near the fireplace, grateful for the warmth. She kept her hood low and listened as conversations drifted through the room. Nearly every discussion returned to the same subject. The prince. Some claimed he had already recovered. Others insisted his condition was worsening. No one seemed to know the truth. Then a merchant at a nearby table lowered his voice. "I heard the royal council is searching through ancient records now." Another man frowned. "Ancient records?" The merchant nodded. "Anything connected to forgotten healing gifts. They say the king has ordered scholars to search every archive in the kingdom." Emma's stomach tightened. Forgotten healing gifts. The words lingered in her thoughts long after the conversation moved on. Hundreds of miles away, inside Thornridge Citadel, the royal archives remained brightly lit despite the late hour. Stacks of dusty books covered a massive oak table. Scholars turned delicate pages while royal advisors searched through centuries of forgotten history. Kale stood nearby, watching with growing impatience. Hours passed before one elderly historian suddenly froze. His hands trembled slightly as he stared at an illustration hidden within a weathered manuscript. "Your Majesty," he whispered. The room immediately fell silent. The historian carefully rotated the book. Drawn across the page was the image of a woman surrounded by birds and woodland animals. Her hands glowed with silver light. Beneath the illustration, faded words described an ancient bloodline known as the Moon Healers. According to the text, they possessed no wolves of their own. Instead, they carried a different gift, a rare connection to life itself. The historian swallowed hard. These healers disappeared generations ago. Kale studied the page. And the child? The old scholar pointed toward another passage. "It says their power was strongest when called by someone in need." At that exact moment, Rowan opened his eyes in the tower chamber above. A peaceful smile touched his face. For the first time in weeks, he looked truly calm. Outside the inn, Emma stepped into the snowy night and gazed toward the northern sky. Countless stars shimmered above the forest. The pull inside her chest had become unmistakable now. Someone was waiting for her. Someone who somehow already knew her name. And neither of them understood that destiny was moving faster than ever before. The next morning dawned clear and cold. Sunlight spilled across the snow-covered road as Emma continued north, her boots leaving a trail of footprints through the untouched white landscape. The farther she traveled, the stronger the feeling became. It no longer arrived in brief flashes. It remained with her constantly now, steady and undeniable. Every heartbeat seemed connected to another heartbeat somewhere beyond the horizon. By midday, the towers of Thornridge Citadel finally appeared in the distance. Rising from the mountains like something carved from winter itself, the fortress stood beneath a sky of brilliant blue. Emma stopped walking. For a moment, she simply stared. The journey that had seemed impossible only days earlier had somehow brought her here. A nervous flutter filled her chest. She was nobody, a forgotten Omega carrying little more than hope. What could she possibly do inside a place like that? Before doubt could take hold, the warmth returned to her hands. Strong, gentle, encouraging. Emma took a deep breath and continued forward. At the same time, activity surged throughout the citadel. Servants hurried through corridors. Advisors gathered in meeting chambers. Guards stood watch near every entrance. News had spread through the fortress that the prince's condition had shifted again. Not worse. Not better. Different. Rowan spent most of the morning sitting quietly beside the tower window. He barely touched the breakfast placed before him. Instead, he watched the winding road leading toward the mountains. Every few minutes he smiled to himself, as though he could see something no one else could. Kale entered the room shortly before noon. The Alpha King looked tired, but there was a new intensity in his silver eyes. The historian's discovery regarding the Moon Healers had changed everything. Ancient records described abilities that sounded impossible, yet impossible things had already happened. Rowan had spoken a stranger's name. He had sensed someone approaching long before any messenger arrived. Kale stood beside his son and followed his gaze toward the distant road. "What do you see?" Rowan smiled faintly. "She is close." Before Kale could respond, a knock sounded at the chamber door. One of the royal guards stepped inside and bowed. "Your Majesty, a traveler has arrived at the southern gate." Kale barely reacted. Dozens of travelers had arrived since the royal summons. Another healer? The guard hesitated. "Not exactly." Kale frowned. "Explain." The guard cleared his throat. She claims she is not a healer at all. Silence filled the room. Rowan immediately sat straighter. His silver eyes brightened. Down below, beyond the towering walls of Thornridge Citadel, Emma stood before the massive gate, clutching the strap of her travel bag. Snowflakes drifted through the air around her. Guards watched her with obvious confusion. One look at her simple clothes and uncertain expression was enough to make several of them exchange amused glances. To them, she looked like the least likely person in the kingdom to answer a royal summons. Emma swallowed hard and looked up at the fortress towering above her. She had no idea that at that exact moment, the prince was smiling for the first time in weeks. And she certainly did not know that her arrival was about to change the fate of everyone inside those walls.